We are so lucky to have Kellyanne Conway, who's over at Trump Tower right now. She's one of Donald Trump's closest advisors. Good morning to you, Kellyanne.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Okay, so we know that we've been watching the golden elevator doors open and close, more people going up to the 26th floor for job interviews. What do you make, and so far what we've seen is a real all-star team. Everybody looks great. But what do you make of the criticism as we look at the cabinet picks so far that, you know what, he's got too many generals. He's just setting himself up for a coup, essentially, is what they're saying. What do you say to that criticism?
I say that this is such a refreshing departure from rewarding donors or your personal friends with cabinet positions as you're forming your government. I mean, generals are serious people, Steve. They are folks who have proven themselves literally on the battlefield or figuratively with their distinguished service in the military or on behalf of our nation. And I keep reading that in places as if there's some kind of quota for the number of tough-minded, accomplished people. There is no quota for the number of tough-minded, accomplished people who are qualified to do each of these jobs. So I think that's one of the many specious attacks putting forward by the election deniers 1 month in. And look, this cabinet is diverse ideologically. It's diverse in terms of gender and race and background. It's just incredible to have a job creator like Linda McMahon heading up the Small Business Administration, somebody who went from 13 employees to 800 and is just a really true, brilliant businesswoman and job creator. You now have, when you talk about those generals, you have Department of Homeland Security, you have Department of Defense, National Security Advisor. I mean, this is a very, I think this is also within the keeping of Donald Trump, to try to get things done quickly with people who have proven their mettle and are people who, like him, are accustomed to being accountable and delivering results.
Indeed.
Kellyanne, all 16 of the positions on cabinet obviously are important, but the big one that everyone is waiting for is Secretary of State. What's the latest on that? When will we find out?
So we obviously are way ahead of schedule when you compare us to past administrations, including President Obama when he was president-elect. He made his first appointment in week 4, and it was Treasury Secretary Tim Geithner. This is a very important decision, Ainsley, and the Secretary of State field has obviously broadened and widened. There are a number of people who have come in recent days and weeks to interview with the President-elect and the Vice President-elect. And just everybody has such a different resume, and they all have to have the same perspective, though. You have to be able to adhere to what will be the Trump doctrine worldwide and be willing to execute on his vision for that role as Secretary of State over at Foggy Bottom. He met with Rex Tillerson, the head of Exxon, this week, as you know. Yesterday, Alan Mulally, the former head of Ford, was there, who obviously did a great job with that company. You've got Governor Romney, Mayor Giuliani, another General Petraeus. You have Senator Bob Corker, who probably would face easy Senate confirmation among his colleagues, who's the head of the Foreign Relations Committee. So you're just talking about a very diverse group. John Bolton, Dana Rohrabacher. I think this is a tremendous process because you can't rush through such an important selection, and at the same time, he is welcoming in a number of men and women who have very diverse backgrounds.
Kellyanne, obviously the list on Secretary of State started small and has expanded. He's talking to a wide swath of people for that potential position. Some people are asking, though, where is Rudy Giuliani, who was seen as the early front runner for that position? Where does he stand? And as it pertains to the Trump doctrine, do you feel like he's where Mr. Trump is on his view of the world?
Well, Mayor Giuliani certainly knows what the Trump doctrine is because he was a very close and loyal advisor all through the campaign, and they've known each other for a number of years. So he was, you know, the mayor was a constant presence pretty much in the waning months of the campaign, had endorsed with the president-elect earlier on in, I guess, the summer or spring. But Mayor Giuliani is still in the mix. I think that's obvious because the president-elect has not said publicly who is and who is not, but you can rest assured those who have been considered are on the list moving forward. And I just think it's going to come down to one man's decision of with whom he's most comfortable and who he thinks can also, Pete, work with these other cabinet members, the Secretary of Defense, General Mattis, certainly, the National Security Advisor, General Flynn, And it's very important to have a cohesive cabinet that is in the service of the president and the vice president.
Alan Mulally, the guy who used to run Ford and Boeing, that's an interesting choice, given that Donald Trump has mentioned both those companies recently. And then Rex Tillerson is interesting because as the top guy at ExxonMobil, he's dealt with Russia and he's dealt with Yemen and countries all over the world. What's interesting
and the
is,
developing world, yes.
Absolutely. Time magazine says that apparently Donald Trump has made it very clear he wants the names of the companies that are considering leaving the country, and that he is personally going to call each and every one of them. Kellyanne, has he started those phone calls?
Those who work on his behalf are executing on that, making a list and checking it twice. And so it's in process. And anytime the president-elect makes a statement like that or expresses his viewpoint, of course, those of us who are there to serve him follow up on that almost immediately. And I think he's making a great point, only insofar as you saw what happened just last week in Indianapolis with the carrier deal. The result is so popular to the American people. You had over 60% of Americans saying that they thought that was a terrific deal for the workers. It improved their opinion of the president-elect Donald Trump. That included 40% of Democrats and 54% of self-identified independents and over 80% or so of Republicans. And so he didn't do it for his own image. He did it because it's the right thing to do. And he did it because he made that a centerpiece of his campaign. And before he's even sworn into office as our 45th president, he is making a difference on significant issues like that, the retention of jobs here. So if he can reach out to industry and he can try to do the same thing where it's appropriate and as it can happen, then why not? People know the USA is open for business again. That if you create a more hospitable business climate for employers to feel like they can attract and retain talent here, that they can expand their operations here, that is, to him, it's job number one. And he's made that very clear.
Well, Hillary Clinton has blamed fake news on her loss, and she says the fake news out there is a danger to the public, and she urges government action. We have a soundbite of her, and we'll get your reaction.
Let me just mention briefly one threat in particular that should concern all Americans. It's now clear that so-called fake news can have real-world consequences. This isn't about politics or partisanship. Lives are at risk. Lives of ordinary people just trying to go about their days, to do their jobs.
Kellyanne?
It's just remarkable. If she's trying to make a nexus between those statements and her electoral loss, then I'm almost at a loss for words, maybe for the first time in a while, because the idea that they just can't grapple with the fact that I don't know what her message was to America, other than I'm not Donald Trump and you shouldn't vote for him. I don't know what her message was to the working class voters that we captured and the union households we carried in some places by 2 to 1. I don't know what her message was to America's women, where she only got 55 or 56% of the vote as the first female presidential nominee from a major party. The idea that, I mean, the most fake piece of news I heard all along, up until Election Day, and still hear from some people, is that Donald Trump couldn't win. How's that for fake news? Misleading news. The fake news certainly was that Michigan and Wisconsin and Pennsylvania were all sewed up, that we couldn't bust through the blue wall. And look, I take seriously what she's saying in terms of people spreading rumors or saying things that aren't true and possible harm coming to people. But it's this whole new cottage industry they're trying to make a big deal of and pin it on, pin it on one party or one man's supporters. That I disagree with completely, and that has to stop. But a little self-awareness would do for a team that is blaming everybody but themselves for this. It's Bernie Sanders' fault. How dare he won? How dare he run? The guy won 22 states, folks, and over 13 million voters. That ain't nothing. It's the alt-right's fault. It's a long list. It's fake news' fault. It's Russian interference. It's Jim Comey, of course, the biggest scapegoat of all. How about you had no message? And people just didn't cotton to your candidate?
Kellyanne, why can't they learn? What's preventing the introspection that the other major party in this country can't seem to do?
It's just amazing to me, Pete, because they missed a huge opportunity last week to put into place Tim Ryan as the minority leader in the House and to say to Nancy Pelosi, thanks for your service, but on your watch you've lost 6 over 60 House seats, in addition to the dozen or so of governors, Senate seats, certainly over 1,000 state legislative seats since she's been the minority leader and Speaker of the House, and since President Obama got there. Guys, 1,000 state legislative seats.
I know.
It's unbelievable how few chambers they control.
Sure.
But they won't learn the lessons. They haven't learned that they are out of touch with the workers of America, that they've become very extreme. The Democratic Party I grew up in no longer exists. The Democratic Party that Bill Clinton won under its banner is gone. The Blue Dog Democrats, the pro-tax reform Democrats, the pro-life and pro-Second Amendment Democrats, they're gone. And you even see it in the approach to terrorism. She referred to them as our determined enemies instead of radical Islamic terrorists or just even terrorists at her convention. So there's no introspection, there's no reflection, and I couldn't be happier because I felt such relief last week. I was so worried the Democrats were going to learn a lesson from this election and actually install a guy who represents Youngstown, Ohio, Mahoning County, a county that went for over 60% to President Obama, and that Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton were separated by 2 or 3 points this time.
There you go. Kellyanne, thank you very much for joining us. We know you got to go back to the tower and get to work. You're working the phones. I understand you're trying to get either Justin Timberlake or Bruno Mars to perform at the inauguration, right?
Yes. You'll be the third to know.
Okay.